Hello everyone, welcome to the sixth and final session of this part of Beyond Bohm, Imagination, Creativity and Dialogue. I'm James Barbieri, Associate Program Director here at the Power Center, and I will be your host for today. As a host, I'm here to help you throughout the call, so any issues, just let me know in the chat. Before we begin, let me just very briefly go through a few guidelines for this Zoom call. First, if you could please mute your microphone to ensure that good quality audio and avoid any background noise. But at the same time, we do invite you all to turn on your cameras. It's always nice to see everyone's faces during these calls. The chat will be closed throughout the call. It will be open, however, for hosts. So if you have any issues, feel free to just message in. We will have a Q&A section later in the session, so we will hear your voices then. Finally, this session is recorded for archival purposes, and for you all, you should receive the link in a couple of days for the recording. So today we have a very, very special session, a perfect way to end the last 3 weeks that we've had together, where we are hosting the annual Indigenous dialogue with the theme Walk in Beauty. Today's roundtable will be composed of Leroy, Jeannette Armstrong, John Briggs, Greg Cajete, Amethyst First Rider, Harvey Locke, Melissa Nelson, and Nichol. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Robin Wall Kimmerer cannot join us today. She was meant to come, but she's had some issues, but we will, of course, think of her today. With that, I will pass it over to you, Lee. Welcome, and welcome all.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you, everyone at PARI, for hosting this and making it possible for us to have these dialogues. And I just want to echo James a bit and really warmly welcome and thank the core participants in the dialogue today. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. So just a couple of brief comments before we begin. It's the 30th anniversary of these dialogues. It was way back in 1992 that Leroy approached David Bohm and proposed a series of dialogues, which David was very happy to accept. And that first dialogue was held in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Unfortunately, David passed away later that year, so he's not been with us since. But Leroy has very faithfully carried on these dialogues for the 30 intervening years. It's been a long and beautiful road. Okay, Leroy, over to you.
Okay. Okay, it's a greeting from Blackfoot. And we say, okay, tanita pio, which means, how are you connected? Before we actually start, I would like to just say a short opening prayer so that we can all clear our minds, so to speak, of the clutter that we might have woken up with this morning and so on. For those of you from other parts of the world, so that, hey, we can clear the mind so that we'll make it easier to be all of one mind. Oh, kia. Ayos the path of you by na to see ku kumbiki sumaka can exist na nakak. Who can the kita spa pekana swika ki kakatu siwakak. Surmukan shkatsamatuan of sikuikak. The kanay to kana to pinana kanai stapi kanoka ka pixum stania mististomia pi. Kamutsipiu kinana taksay sano si pinano kimnuknukta si puy pinanikak matapiwa manastitsinaps piamo kano mianis si ipik siwakak Daksni pinna daksupuya paskni pinna na dakskita putta tsaw pinna mokni pata pilsen nithuts pinna no misami pata pilsen na piusni ta Mr. Watsamani oh kikamotan oh ah um, we want to just a couple of things to keep in mind in order and so on. And that is, we're not going to take any breaks during the dialogue because sometimes a break kind of shifts us and slows down the momentum and so on of the conversations and the discussions. But if you feel that you have to go get a drink, go to the restroom or so, feel free to go anytime and so on, and come back and join the discussion. And we've been calling these gatherings, dialogues, and so on. Yes, we've had dialogues and so on. However, the difference with this series Beyond Bohm has been that, of course, it's on Zoom and not in person and much shorter. Usually the dialogues we've had in the past went 3-4 days, and we've always had what we would call a dialogue conscious mind. And it takes a little time to really get into that dialogue conscious mind, because it really means trying to remove all the clutter and so on of our minds so that something new, something different will be easier to take on. When our minds are full, things like a full cup of water, hey, will just spill over the edges. So as best as we can within the allowable time, we might try and reach for this decluttering of our minds, all the tacit stuff that we're carrying around that might get in the way and so on. And when that happens, hey, sometimes we end up playing defense and so on, as opposed to really listening to, really focusing on the topic of the dialogue. So in this case, what we're wanting to discuss and so on is the ecological role of human beings, homo sapiens. In other words, in our current scientific world and conservation world and so on, we talk about all the other beings, be they animals, be they plants and the earth itself. We talk about everything else, everybody else, but we never talk about ourselves. We never examine the role that human beings play in this ecological picture of our existence and so on. So that's what we want to focus on. Let's look at ourselves. What is our ecological role? Let's not worry about the bears. Let's not worry about the buffaloes. Let's not worry about those plants out there. The three sisters and so on, they're doing their part. What about us? What about us? See, and in some circles, In science, they're talking about us as an invasive species. We originated, at least according to the scientists, out of Africa. So in other words, we're nature, we're natural to Africa. But when you look at us, we're all over the world. See? And that's why some scientists are talking about humans as being an invasive species. So we're all over the place. See? So with that in mind, I would like to, as a facilitator for the for this dialogue conversation, I'm just going to call on any one of you to start the conversation, to hear your thoughts about that issue. What is the ecological role of Homo sapiens, of human beings? I'd like to start way down south. Greg, what do you think about the issue?
Well, of course, I think it's the question of the time, right? We're all in some way debating. I think those very important ideas and perspectives about who we are as human beings and what our role is in the world today. I'm coming from we're coming off COVID. We're coming off well, we're not off COVID. I should correct myself. We're still very much in kind of an iteration of COVID around the world with the new strains, and we're also in really witnessing major climate change impacts. Here in the Southwest, we've had several mega fires burning up hundreds of thousands of acres of prime land, and at the same time having unusually hot weather right now in terms of our weather patterns. And this is pretty much happening all over the world in some shape and form. So more and more people can't really deny that something is happening with the environment. I think for Native people, one of the things that came early on was a realization that human beings had to be really cognizant, I guess you might say, of their role. And so, this is something that's talked about in many Native traditions, and was talked about and is talked about still today. I think for us as Pueblos, we are guided by an origin story, a story of emergence, which is kind of, I would say, an ecological tale, because we move through these different stages of being human in the world, so that the story begins with the earliest humans, and some of the kinds of struggles that we had in order to survive and sustain ourselves. And then climate happens, or usually a natural force happens to destroy that world, and a few people survive, climb a reed ladder into the next world. The next world has its own kind of characteristics and changes, and the people populate that world, and then again something happens so that a few survive, and they move again, they emerge into the next world. So in each world there are instructions about how to live in that world, how to honor and respect each other, and how to be human, how to be human. as you know, most native terms for themselves are human beings, so
Mhm.
we call it, so it's a very integral tale of emerging humanness, in the world, beginning from the earliest times into the present. So, we've emerged into this world with all its complexities, but in each of those worlds, we're given, instructions by nature itself, by the entities in nature, of how to respect, how to be responsible, and how to be human in that world. And so here we are, at the precipice, I think, basically emerging into yet another world of being, and really beginning to search for the instructions, and really look for the cues of what we need to be doing, as human beings in the world, and the role that we need to be playing. So I think
Mhm.
it's much in line with this evolutionary kind of understanding of how people populate, each world of being, face issues and crisis, have to make changes in who they think they are, and what they do in order to move into this next world of being. So that's basically the Pueblo story of emergence. So Pueblos are very diverse. Actually, we have diverse languages, but our common characteristic, is that we share that story of emergence. So whether you're Hopi or Tewa or
Mhm.
Eason, we all have variations of that story of instruction. And I'm looking at Melissa Nelson, original instruction,
Mhm.
what
Yeah.
we are to do in the world. So it's a constant conversation. It's a constant dialogue. I think that traditionally we had ways, through our storytelling traditions, through our ceremonies, to help us to remember who we are and what our role is in the world. That's the purpose of many of the ceremonies that we have, as Native people. It's remembering to
Uh-huh.
remember that role in some very specific ways, tangible ways, as it applies to us. And it's
Mm.
about sustaining ourselves as human beings in the world through time and through generations. And
Ah,
that's why native science essentially is the original sustainability science, because it
right.
is always about, at its core, about sustaining human beings in their place through time.
Right.
And so I think, in a nutshell, we
Right.
we we have had, and we have guidance, in terms of our role, and our participation, with the health and the well-being of not only each other but also the natural world. But the question is, do we pay attention? Do we listen? And do we?
Very
Because
much so.
there's the human nature that comes in, even for Native people. We have to remind ourselves consistently and constantly. That's why we have all the things that we have, to
Yeah.
remind. But still, we forget, and still we
Yeah.
have to come back to that question.
Right. In other words, we have to be a lot more irresponsible. Yeah.
Yes.
Let me hear from Harvey. I think you're on mute, Harvey.
No, I think I'm live.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I found what Greg said really fascinating about bearing instructions for how to live in the next world. And when you framed the question, Leroy, for us in the written form as well, you included the idea of, what is the ecological niche of human being in the Anthropocene, or this idea that we live
Right.
in the human time. And
Right.
I've tried to think about that a little bit. And I think one of the important things to think about in the Anthropocene is to not confuse what we're capable of doing with knowing what we're doing. And I like to used a metaphor that humans in the Anthropocene are like a bull in the china shop. We have enormous power and we're destroying things everywhere, but we are not capable of creating that which we are destroying. And so we've got this thing where we can break China, but we can't make China. And that calls for a really different way of behaving than we have been behaving. And in this respect, I've been drawn to a Czech philosopher named Karel Čapek, who talked about humans, you having intelligence, cleverness, and wisdom. Of course, intelligence is the ability to think, but cleverness is the ability to think for self-serving purposes. And wisdom is the use of your intelligence for the benefit of others. And broadly speaking, Western civilization has been extremely clever. It's allowed us to have this Zoom call, for example, but we're also destroying where we live. So that's not very wise. And so we've got this break between being wise and being clever. And, you know, the last time the Western world went through what, and I'd like to build off of what Greg said, you know, when you're reinventing your world after a calamity with a set of instructions, well, that of course is the end of World War I, World War II, in the first half of the 20th century, where we try to reinvent the ideas of multilateralism and the United Nations and all those sorts of things. And this idea of humanism, where we're all responsible for each other as fellow humans. Well, I would argue that now that we're in the 21st century and just thinking about people is actually causing a meltdown of the context for people and all the rest of life. And that we have to extend this idea of wisdom and this idea of instructions going forward into thinking about the rest of life. And by the rest of the life, I think not only in terms of species, but also in terms of natural processes that are alive, like rivers and things like that. And that I find that to be a very interesting intersection with concepts like all my relations that come from Indigenous traditions. And that maybe now we're on the cusp of being able to take Western scientific knowledge and meet Indigenous knowledge and sort of set a new set of instructions going forward that respects both, without validating one against the other, but rather how we might go forward in a new way, considering the ecological niche of humanity at a time when our own existence is at risk.
Good thoughts. And the thing is, if we stop and back up and a little bit and reflect, what you've been saying is very true. And that is, hey, everywhere we've gone, that is Homo sapiens, human beings, everywhere where we've appeared and gone on this globe of ours, on this earth, hey, we've caused some interference, some disturbance, and so on. And it seems like we don't do too much about it. We just keep moving. Yeah. Let me call on Melissa.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Leroy. Good morning, everyone. And I want to welcome Jeannette, who joined us. Welcome, Jeannette.
Yeah. Good morning, Jeannette.
Good morning. Yes, Leroy, your question about humans' role and our niche and tying it to, the field of ecology and Indigenous knowledge. In the field of ecology, humans are often characterized either as producers like the plants or consumers, right, like the animals. And there's a few nuances in between, but I think humans have decided to become, at least under more colonial understandings and worldviews, humans as consumers, not humans as producers. And almost every species has some kind of regulation by a predator. And humans, our predators, grizzly bears, we kind of have destroyed their habitat and killed them off as much as we could. And we don't really have a top predator. So our Indigenous original instructions have told us we have to self-regulate. Right, we have to self-regulate to keep ourselves in check. The idea of checks and balances is very much a an ecological idea, but it was very much encoded in our original instructions with our elders and our youth and our medicines to keep us in check, both in terms of our populations and our behaviors. And Jeannette Armstrong writes about this quite beautifully in the way she interprets her Celix indigeneity. And so I think that there's been a mistake in humans' role as consumers. And, you know, that's created this techno-utopian ideas that we can just consume and create technology. Our only creations have become quite destructive. They haven't become harmonizing, as our beloved Rose would always talk about. How do we harmonize? It's not mimic. There's a whole field of biomimicry that's about mimicking nature. And on one level, yes, we have to mimic. Indigenous peoples have always emulated and harmonized, but it's not just a blanket mimicking, it's actually adding something as well. So it's really that core value and practice of reciprocity where we are receiving from the natural world, our air, our water, our food, our medicine, our breath, our spirit, and then we are returning that in our breath and our creativity and our intention and our presence and our listening. And so that kind of flow of reciprocity, I think, is our niche. We are here to be grateful. We are here to receive the gifts and to be grateful and return the gifts, as Robin says and has written about so beautifully, returning that gift of life in more of a dance. It's more in what we would call art or creativity than technology. Although some of our technologies are fantastic. We're having this dialogue now, but they've gotten out of hand so that it's almost like our technologies, they're running us. We are not running them anymore. So those are some thoughts I'd like to contribute here, and also welcome not Rose, but our beloved Eva. Great to see you and joining us.
Yeah. Hi, Eva. Hey, but the thing is, I guess when we're talking about irresponsibility, and hey, we keep getting these signals, if we want to call them that, that hey, we have to stop and reflect. And in fact, as Pari Centers wrote a little while back, hey, the most simple of beings, you know, a little virus has caused chaos in, you know, in our world. And yet we're not still listening. We're still talking about going back to the normal, you know, when the normal really is the problem, you know.
That was, can I add just one more thing, that because we've destroyed the grizzly bears and other things, there has not been a regulation on humans. And so many of our instructions were disrupted and taken away, and we are revitalizing and restoring them. But Mother Earth is regulating us with this little invisible virus, and the climate, the storm of climate change, which hopefully will wake us up too. So yes, there are two major things among other crises or pandemics we are facing now that are trying to wake us up to change our worldviews and our lifestyles.
Right.
Thank you, Roy.
Thanks for those wonderful thoughts. John, let me.
Yes, thanks, Leroy. When you posed the original question, I immediately thought that there were sort of two kinds of answers to that. Are you trying to reach? Sorry. That we've heard the native view, which is balance and original instructions and integration. It's a humble view of our role in the natural world. It's a view that says we want to return the life that we've been given, and to foster other life and participate. And we're grateful for the sacrifices that other life makes for us. However, we're in our cultures, the dominant cultures in the world, I think we have to admit, are very far away from that kind of thinking. They're thinking in terms of objects, extraction, domination. And I actually think that there are two kinds of consciousness, which everybody has, that maybe McGilchrist's, Ian McGilchrist, who did this great tome on the split brain, he points out that the left brain is the brain that could probably describe our dominant cultures in the world today. It's a brain that focuses on objects, and it focuses on power and dominating those objects, controlling the natural world. And then there's another consciousness, the right brain kind of consciousness, which is actually I just read that the right brain, which is a holistic view of the world, is the brain that exists. He calls it the primary brain. It's the brain that children have the first year of their life, and then they start to develop this anthropocentric consciousness, this consciousness of things as essentially separate, things as objects. And of course, that breaks down. If you extend that long enough, it breaks down as quantum mechanics has shown. But this holistic consciousness, I think, has been suppressed. So I guess my take on it would be, somehow we have to get to the original instructions for the new world that Greg was talking about, by understanding that our the consciousness that we've been using to build our civilization is not built for that. It's built for other things, but it's not built to be the ground on which we stand. And so the native peoples stand on a holistic ground, and of course they can, they're just as able to use that anthropocentric consciousness as anybody, but they're not grounded in that. So I think that we cannot get an answer to our ecological role by thinking in the way that we have been thinking. We have to think, and we have to open up that other way of thinking, which native peoples have preserved for thousands of years, and have made cultures that, as I think Greg said, keep that awareness going, right? The ceremonies, the rituals, they keep that awareness in operation. Our cultures are now grounded in keeping aware that it's all about us as individuals. It's all about us as dominating the natural world.
Thanks for those good thoughts. And the thing is, on this right brain, left brain thing, in fact, is it because there's an imbalance between the left and the right, and so on?
Yeah.
And maybe one of the reflections we have to go through is trying to balance that left and right,
Exactly.
and so on. Yeah. Let me hear my beloved Amethyst.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. I just wanted to follow a little bit behind what Greg had said, and that, yes, we are very gifted in that most tribal people are given creation stories, and in those creation stories are challenges on how to be a human being and how to behave as a human being. Our tribe, the Blackfoot, we're sky people. And so we have many gifts that through nature show us how to be good human beings. And in fact, this spring, we had a wonderful gathering in community on creation story on Scarface and the gifts that Scarface gave us. And it was wonderful to hear our language. Just being in the energy and presence of your traditional language, you start to understand your role as a human being and your role in stepping into that reality that that language gives you. So I think that the most, for us in Indigenous world, the best compliment you can get from anyone in your community is in Blackfoot is you're a good Nitsitabi. And that means you're a good real person. And your whole journey is to become a real person. And it doesn't happen all with a set of, even instructions. You have to learn how to figure out how to be a real person. And to comment a little bit about what we're doing in the world today with such things as COVID, it was a time where we were all isolated, but it gave us a time of reflection. And I remember seeing the numbers, high numbers of people that were affected by COVID and how quickly people were leaving, were passing because of that disease. And it made me reflect a little bit about smallpox and how hundreds and thousands and millions of Indigenous people were in North and South America, and how the introduction again of some virus, such as smallpox, literally wiped our people out in days. And that really gave me some perspective of what invasive species do to a whole society. And what it takes then is a lot of nurturing and taking care of our relationships to get back. And one of the things that I'm most proud of, even through this COVID period, is that our community took very good care of our elders and our children. We had setups in our community to get vaccine. Our community went out and fed people. They delivered food. So that relational taking care of each other was still there. And that was one thing I'm very proud of my tribe, is that they did a wonderful job of doing that. And of course, with instructions, and most important with prayer. And prayer is about thought. And when you pray, it isn't something individually. It isn't sometimes something that you're just asking. It really is about thought as a whole collective. And what you put in your prayers is that energy and that constant motion, constant flux. So prayer is about spirit and connecting with spirit, asking help, but also your thoughts will convey what you should be doing. And that's why even our elders, they're so cute, because they'll say, you young people, you better start praying and think about what you need to contribute. Quit living off our prayers and quit relying on our prayers. You think, oh, they're praying for us, we're okay. But it's your participation in that thought movement that also helps to shift the energy of the world. And also, of course, for me, even if you said, let's not talk about animals and stuff, the whole idea of the world is about relationships, from the seed to the dirt to the fungi, all the way up to air and cloud and all the animals. And for me, that was my teaching. Was I thought, I'm just going to help get buffalo on the ground and I'm done. But boy, was I surprised, because the minute I got those buffalo on the ground, I wanted them to have a beautiful place to be. And what did that mean? That meant we had to decolonize agricultural practices and bring in grasslands. And not only grasslands, but how do we get the other animals to come back into the environment to help climate change? And what a beautiful journey. I'll just give one quick example, is that the participation of our community in bringing the buffalo up to Banff was that our community all got together and we did a huge tobacco prayer, because we all couldn't go up to the area behind Leroy where the buffalo were placed. And so we all did a huge prayer, and they took those thoughts from the tobacco, as I said, our wishes and our hopes. And we, by helicopter, they brought them up into the valley. Leroy was lucky he got to go, and they spread out all the tobacco. And so when the buffalo arrived, and I always am given this example because we got gifts from the woman who came from the sky. When we were re-gifted the buffalo, they came from the sky through helicopters and crates, but they came from the sky, and they were our modern gift. And so within the first week, we talked and we made relationships with the parks people, and we asked them, can you please observe? We didn't tell them do methodology and do count numbers. We said, can you just observe? And when you come down, tell us what you see. And one of the beautiful stories about Banff is that they said within hours, the birds came in, and I'm not sure if it was a magpie, and they plucked some of the buffalo hair for nests. And those buffalo hadn't been around for 150 years. How did that bird know that relationship? The next week or a few days later, eagle came in and just sat in a tree and watched them. Renewal of my relationship. And there was a few more examples, but just to be quick, in the end, wolf came, and the wolves just laid on the ground and watched. And that was also welcoming the buffalo back into that environment, into that climate. And we've all in community in that tried to provide a renewal of relationship with our buffalo. So that's a quick example of how I think I became a better human being, because I was then able to see the world through that kind of work. So I can go on forever, but I think that we're very lucky, as Greg has said, and I know Melissa and had Kimberly been here, we have those creation stories, and they set our boundaries, they set our renewal, they set our plants, they set our sound, they give us all what we need to sustain this world. And of course, all of us get misguided, and we fall, and we have to renew those processes. But it's once you sort of find that renewal process, then I think it helps put you in a different paradigm. And that paradigm shift is really what Western world needs to look at in looking at a different paradigm. Thank you.
Hey, wonderful. You're talking about prayer and praying and so on. I guess we as human beings have been praying, but when we're praying, it's with an E, not with an A. That's what we've probably been doing all this time. Yeah. Let me hear from our host, please.
Well, thank you, Leroy. Thank you, everyone. I'm just full to the brim, taking in everything that everyone has shared. But there are a couple of things that jump out. Greg, you've inspired and provoked in a good way a lot here from your opening comments, and I would sort of like to add to that about one of the phrases that you used was, gosh, I'm getting old and I'm forgetting the phrase, but it was to do with the creation story and the evolving, that the phases of human unfolding, and that the unfoldings are there to fit and harmonize with the subsequent worlds that also evolve, and all of it moving together. And part of what that had me thinking was that from a Western perspective, you know, we create these problems like the environmental climate crisis that we're in now. But going way back, problem after problem after problem in our version of being in this world. And then we fix those problems, or we attempt to fix them. Sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. But what we have is this kind of fix-it mentality, a problem-solving mentality. And of course, there are places where that's appropriate. Things need to be fixed. For example, with our current climate crisis, if we don't fix it, we're really in very big trouble. It may be very difficult to fix this. But if we can fix it, surely we should fix it. But the thing is, if we fix it, we'll turn around and we'll do it again. Right? Because that's the nature of the consciousness that we currently inhabit in the dominant Western consciousness. We can fix a problem and then we'll turn around and we'll do the same thing or something similar again, because those deeper aspects of our consciousness haven't been touched by fixing some particular problem. It has to do with a much deeper sense of change. I don't think we can go on creating problems and then fixing, and then creating problems and then fixing them. We have to get into something more fundamental than that, it seems to me. And so one of the questions for me is how to do that. How do we get to that more fundamental level? And the feeling I had in listening to what's been said by everyone today is, how can we be penetrated by some quality, by some spirit, something that will break through all of that habit and all of those centuries of moving in certain kinds of patterns of thinking? What does it take to penetrate that? The feeling of that, you know, not just the idea of it or the concept, but in a kind of heart sense. What does it take to penetrate so that there's maybe a kind of shock, so that we realize how vast the issue really is, and what a challenge we really have in this time in our unfolding in that next stage of human being. We get maybe a kind of shock to realize it's not a fix-it question, right? It's not just tinkering and adjust a little bit here, but it's much more fundamental than that. And as I was thinking about that, what would it take to penetrate? You know, we could perhaps make a list, some of which may have some value and some of which may not. But one of the things that I think could is so simple, and it just involves being on the land, which is more and more and more rare for anyone these days. And that being in the land and walking the land and being quiet and being still. And there's your ear, Leroy, that ear responsibility. That if we can do that, even a little bit, go out and listen to the land. And I think that could possibly begin to penetrate all this incrustation that we've accumulated for centuries. Mm-hmm. And just one more bit on that. Even to do that is daunting, because we know that the average 7 to 12 or 13-year-old child, at least in the United States, they're looking at screens for an average of 9 hours a day. And that doesn't include their homework that they do on screens. And we know that schools are cutting out further and further anything that takes children out onto the land. So with that cycle set in motion, the prospect of being able to listen and penetrate all that incrustation doesn't look very good. But I think if we just keep staying awake to it and sensing the depth of the challenge, that we will find a way. All of what I'm saying sounds rather negative, and I don't feel negative, but really just to kind of indicate that the fix-it mentality will not resolve this. It's going to take more than that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good thoughts. And the thing is, in other words, we never really want to do anything about the real underlying problem. We just want to keep putting the Band-Aids on so that we could stay in what we refer to as the normal. Say, and as we said, maybe we should examine that normal and see whether, if it really is the problem. In other words, because when we're talking about ecology and the ecological role of human beings in the world, hey, we really don't want to look at that. We're in the fixing mentality, as you've said. Let's hear from Jeannette. How are you, Jeannette?
Good morning. My apology to everyone. My Wi-Fi where I was at went out, so I had to come back home here. And I'm glad to see everyone. It's just been wonderful listening to everyone. Some of the things that I wanted to talk about is just going back to that idea of starting with that idea of relational conservation values and what I understand it seems to be about. Maybe my understanding is different, and that's where I'd like to focus my thinking. It seems to be about the quality of relationship between humans and nature. And about, as others have said, the responsibility in the human role to the natural environment, or the ecological niche of the human within place. And I think it's in that last part that I was thinking about in the last, couple of weeks, thinking about how do I share without speaking my language. And I was really, really moved by what Amethyst was saying, and I'd like to kind of follow some of the strands of thinking that she provided. But the idea of the ecological niche of the human is where I'd like to focus my thinking and share some ideas of some of the thoughts that I've been spending some time in my research and my work, the practical work, and then thoughts that I share there in different places. I know that that idea of relational values of nature has been discussed by many others as being about relationship between humans and nature, and that values are rooted in those relationships themselves. And I think about that, and I think about myself as being seal, and think about, is it about social bonding among us as seal within that environment? Is it about the care, the attention, the watchfulness, the responsibilities that we think about as in different parts of our society, and how our society is constructed or was constructed to do that, which, you know, isn't there now. There's many gaps in it now, although much of it, you know, is still surviving. Is it about place attachment, as Chan and others have said? Is it about meaningful life among us as humans within place? Or is it about the spiritual and religious meanings? And I'm also thinking about the field that I decided to do some work in. My PhD is in my language, with my elders, with my knowledge keepers, and with my medicine people. That's where my PhD is, but I have this other paper one that, you know, requires you to do a lot of reading and a lot of thinking about that reading. And so some of the ideas in the field of environmental ethics, and where my area is, that resonated with my seal thought to some degree was that idea of bioregionalism, in the way that Berthold Bohm talks about it. His idea of the placement of humans through an ethical relationship as a part of place, and how that bioregionalism is a set of relationships in that place, quality relationships. And another one, Baird Collicott, who outlined the idea of an ecological community and the human as a part of that ecological community, including all living things and non-living things like soil and water and the conditions that exist there. And that, you know, as Melissa mentioned, that, you know, that each has a role or a function in that, in terms of being producers or consumers or decomposers, providing service to that community in different ways, and each with a niche in that ecosystem, is the way that I understand he's thinking about it, was in that land is a community in that way. And so the description of what community is, in terms of how community provides service to each other and holds up each other in that way, seems to have some resonance with how the Silk people think about it. And, you know, as been mentioned by others, Lee's points in terms of the kind of utilitarian conservation that embraces sustainable use of natural resources, whether it's plants or animals, as long as there's evidence that demonstrates that the use and protection of species must be done. And I think about that idea of how that's really about the market, and the engagement of community is really about fulfilling what is perceived to be their needs and more their desires. So that this foundation of sustainability that arose through the green economist guy, Herman Daly, for example, in his notion of nature as economy, rather than as community, is really antithetical to, you know, some of the notions that I see and is problematic in a number of different ways. Whether we think of, nature as a series of ways in which we can utilize renewable or non-renewable resources and how we can balance that seems to be part of what conservation is about in many ways. And so that part is what is problematic in my mind. So what does that thinking do with the wholeness of nature? And it seems to me that idea of the wholeness of nature and our part of that wholeness is really opposite to that idea of sustainability in the way that it's positioned there. So I just wanted to mention that kind of as a context for what I think of as the seal ethic and that idea of the relational understanding that I would have. And I wouldn't claim to have any knowledge of other Indigenous people's thoughts about that. But I was thinking about that it seems to be more than what those others have mentioned, and that it is that the main core of that is that the land is oneself. That the whole system is an extension of one's own flesh and blood in a very real, physical, relational sense. It's not just that we are human beings, but we are that. We are that which is out there. And until we can see that and know that in that particular way, we have the common problem of isolating ourselves as though we were separate from that, and we can do anything to that and think it doesn't, affect us. And of course it is affecting us in every way. And I'm just going to share a few more thoughts on that idea, because it takes us to spirituality. It takes us to the ceremonial and the things that John was reaching for and talking about as well in what I wanted to share with you. We know that we become human only because we can isolate ourselves in our unique ability of thought. We can think as human beings, and we know that we're actually, as humans, always in the state of being a part of that, but what we as Seal people call the Tmich, and which in my dissertation I called the ethic Tmich centrism, centered around that idea of what that is, what that whole system is, and that as a living system. And in other words, we're always relating to them. Whether good or bad, we're always in relationship with them. And so to speak about why we're in trouble is to look at the roles that humans have in understanding that, because we have thought. That's our unique ability. We have the ability to be able to think and to be able to understand and to be able to know what those relationships are. We're not just engaged in them automatically. In the Western terminology, the idea of, if I were to try to put it in Western terminology, that the Tmich are all of those things, the myriad of those things that have organized themselves over time in different places, in different conditions, into an order by which they're all governed, and within which each is subject to the laws of that order.
Right. Yeah.
In a way, it describes the idea of an ecological order. So the human is different in that order, in that they are not bound by the laws of that order because they can think. They can manage creatively their ways out of being bound by that order. Not like the other things that are bound continuously to regenerate themselves in what that order demands of them. So the human is different from the seal perspective. It is not the unique ability of logic, memory, language, or other things that makes them different. It is not being bound by the laws that the rest of the Tamihuat organized over a long period. This is what is said in our one of our main legal chapter about environment, our main legal laws story. As Greg probably mentioned, I missed his talk and I'm really sorry to have missed it. But to be responsible to and be bound by those laws, humans require knowledge in their own unique ability to be able to understand and be bound by those laws that are there for everything else. And thereby be brought into that order. And that is brought into the knowledge of that place as a whole order. That for us is the meaning of Tamihu. It's right in the word, in the image of the word. To know that within each living thing, that the whole is enfolded in its role as a part of that wholeness, and that each is precious and essential in that way. Humans don't automatically have that ability enfolded within them, although they are affected by and do affect it. Their responsibility is to find and apply that old knowledge that is part of the whole order, which is their role within the whole ecosystem. So from the seal of that knowledge, their responsibility is that they must learn everything of that wholeness, all the relational parts as sets of relationships and relationship back to their lives and the wholeness of humans. And they must see beyond each thing as a separate part to its unseen relationships in that living system. David Bohm's idea, and the wholeness of implicate order resonates with that in his notion that in some sense, each region of a whole order contains a total structure enfolded within it. He noted that in this view of order, laws represent invariant relationships between explicit entities and its structures. And I'm not going to go into all of the physics that he did to explain that. But some of the conversations that we do have, that I have had with, say, Fritjof Capra, who's a friend of mine, in the Tao physics, really is, in that sense, the physical knowledge of that complexity and the structure, what the seal see in being part of the place that they are. In part of all the ways in which that knowledge comes through is required of the human in the way you do things, and most particularly in the ceremonies, because it moves you to that other part, if it is the right brain. Still don't know what's right brain and left brain, but I know that in our consciousness, when we do the songs, there's some other part of our mind that we move to that allows us to be able to resonate with that. There's some ceremonies that we have that, and there's some configurations like dancing in a round circle, for instance, that allows us to move away from that individual, separate, fragmented way of looking at the world to a more whole, I use the word communing with that wholeness. And I know that others are looking at this in different ways in terms of how, for instance, the medicine knowledge that we have, we rarely talk about it outside of our communities, but we know we reach far into that wholeness, farther into that wholeness that science prevents us from looking at. And so, but it is science in that particular way of thinking about it, in that, you know, Bohm likes to call it the implicate order of, you know, of things in a physics sense, but in a metaphysical sense, the way that we as humans need to be able to see that and connect to that is where I see the problem. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I have a lot of questions, more questions than thoughts, and just thank everyone.
Well, thanks for all those thoughts and so on. We had started out with the notion about the ecological niche. And to a large extent, it seems like we've been pointing out all the problems that we as humans have to try and reflect on so that we can make the corrections, so to speak. And I guess the way I would kind of put it is, and you've been pointing that out, Jeannette, and all of you, is that we humans have taken ourselves out of the chain that all other beings, be they animals and plants, the earth itself, there's a chain, and we're the missing link. We're the missing link because we've taken ourselves out of that circle. Okay, if that's the case, I'm going to throw out, and I'd like to have any one of you respond, and that is, if we're going to become part of the chain again, how do we do it? We've been the missing link. And if we're going to become part of that overall chain so that there would be a holistic and this ecological balance, how do we as Homo sapiens, as humans, do that? Any one of you, I'd be glad to hear your thought. How do we do it? How do we best approach that? Becoming part of the chain again.
I think it may have something to do with sort of mastering or understanding better that fix-it mentality. Jeannette mentioned sustainability as nature as an economy. That's a fix-it. That's, in my view, that's a fix-it solution to the problem. And one of the things about fix-it solutions is that they usually create more problems. Right?
That's very true.
Knowing when to apply fix-it technology to the situation is the key.
Right.
You know,
okay.
I'm thinking about, if I could introduce an analogy, think of music. Music notation is actually a kind of invention to describe something that can't really well be described. So when you hear somebody play, it's just a reason that traditional music is passed down from one generation to another. It's not written down in musical sheets. So if you think about the notes of the music which are kind of ways of indicating that some fluid melody is taking place. The notes of the music are like that fix-it mentality. We've broken the world up into bits and pieces and divisions and so on.
Right
Any
on.
musician will tell you that you can't play a song with the notation. You have to bring something to it. You have to fill in the spaces and the relationships among the notes. And that's the thing that you can't do with a fix-it mentality, as it were. You can't do that by the numbers.
Fantastic.
That's I think our problem, or the issue. Problematizing actually is one of the characteristics of anthropocentric consciousness, is it problematizes everything.
Right.
I was quite struck by Amethyst's story of the buffalo, because I felt in myself as I heard that story of the birds coming back and of the wolves coming back and watching, that we didn't have to go any further. I felt that I was embedded in that situation, right? And somehow bringing that into play in our thinking, I think what might be a way to answer your question.
Become part of the chain again.
Right.
Leroy, I
Yes.
think especially, just building off what Jeannette has so eloquently stated, I think what's implied also is this whole notion of what it is to come to know something, coming to knowledge. How do we come to knowledge? And this then implies, the whole notion of how we educate and what we call education. And so, in my realm as a Native educator, that's always been a major question. First, for Native people, to know their own histories, to understand some of what we're talking about in the context of Native education. But now, as you can see, the icon by my name is Veritas Graduate Institute, which is a PhD program, and there are a lot of these actually coming up in the whole world, that are moving beyond the borders and the boundaries of higher education structures, and beginning to create programs that allow us to really begin to explore this question of coming to knowledge, coming to know. And John, the notion of the fix-it and all of these things. So what I'm saying is that this whole notion of coming to knowledge is happening all over the place in very many different kinds of ways. And especially in terms of Indigenous education, we're doing a lot with our own Indigenous people and scholars. Community schools, a variety of things that we're doing, to try to bring our own knowledge back, to understand our own process of knowledge and coming to knowledge. But I see that also as a major way to look at how to change the consciousness that currently is at play, and that is so destructive to our world.
Fantastic. Harvey.
Well, one of the things that I've learned from actually many of the people who are on this call is from a listening point of view. I haven't heard one Indigenous person on this call talk about rights. I've only heard responsibilities.
Right on.
The discourse around Indigenous knowledge is always phrased as rights. And as you taught me, Leroy, we only use that to try to get at our responsibility because other people understand that. And I think it's one of the breakdowns in us sort of coming together thought-wise, is that the responsibilities point is the way to get back into the chain. Right? If we're in a relationship, then I need to think about your needs, and I'm responsible to you, just as you are responsible to me. And that kind of reciprocity or mutual giving. These are all the words that have come up in this. And
Right.
That isn't so far away ethically from an awful lot of the sort of, let's go to the Judeo-Christian foundation for a moment. This idea of me as a selfish entity is actually anomalous in human history. We haven't really been able to get away with being overtly greedy forever as a value system. It's actually emerged as a value system that would, you couldn't have said that out loud when I was 20 years old, that I just want to be greedy.
That's
You
very
couldn't have
true.
said it, but now you can, right? And
Right.
there was actually the film Wall Street where he said greed is good, and that was intended to be ironic, and then it became a mantra, and people bought greed is good ties. Like it morphed from being a joke into a thing. And
Right.
one of the things that I like to think about is also that in all traditions, this question where people are thinking traditionally, if you take the Chinese tradition, there's heaven, there's the earth, and then there's people. And there's a phrase that comes from the Tao, is the one begets the two begets the three, and the three beget the 10,000. Meaning it's the combination of those three things that create the energy of the world. And Jeannette, I felt, was sort of talking about that line there. Where is the human in that?
Right.
In that space? We're not the same as everything else, yet we're part of everything else. And how do we come to knowledge, as Greg said? And then the final thing that I thought I'd just throw into the mix is, people who look like me used to think about being in relationship with the natural world before the Roman era. And then something happened that I call the Roman rupture, where we decided that instead of looking for the genius loci, for example, which was the spirit of place before we would site a building, because we'd want to get in line with the land's flows, we started building aqueducts and straight roads and became engineers and dominating the land. And that's actually only a 2,000-year-long behavior pattern from one culture radiating from Europe that has been very clever and made us rich, and is now actually impoverishing us because of the climate changing, the death of other species, the overwhelming numbers of us that are gobbling up everything in the ocean. So we also can imagine going back to what I'll call pre-Roman thinking
Right.
also. And that doesn't mean rejecting people's religious traditions and stuff. And I always like to point out that in the Old Testament, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, is Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes says, all human striving is vanity. Whatever befalleth the beasts, befalleth mankind. And that famous song by the Birds, to every season turn, 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 there is a season, turn, turn, turn. That's actually directly lifted out of Ecclesiastes, all those words. And so we can think that way too, if we allow ourselves to. And part of why I find it exciting to be in what I call an Indigenous dialogue is when people enter a conversation from the perspective of responsibility, I'm all ears. Because that to me is what the problem is that we're not responsible, we're greedy, and we're selfish. And anyway, I wanted to surface those thoughts as part of the mix or the pizza that we're trying to make here.
Right. Well, talking about Christian Judeo ecclesiastical notions, you know that the Pope is coming to Canada on his penitential trip, as he put it somehow. And one of our elders heard about the papal visit, and his response was, "Holy." Let me take one more, comment about, hey, how do we become part of the chain again? How do we become part of the chain? Because we've been, taking ourselves out, and there's a missing link in that chain. How do we become part of that chain again?
Hmm. Uncle Leroy, I have some thoughts, but I want to defer to my aunties Amethyst and Jeannette if they would like to share on that.
Let's go ahead, Melissa.
Okay. I was really, as always, moved by Lee's interpretation of the tacit infrastructures of our mind bodies as incrustation. Such a great metaphor for that. And how do we penetrate this incrustation of those assumptions and mistakes that have become so embedded? We think they're normal and they're creating so much destruction. And I think Lee's suggestion that time in the natural world to become more porous again to the spirits and the harmonies of the energies there, as Amethyst shared so beautifully with the buffalo, and that Jeannette shared with her language and the orders of things. I think that is so critical. And one thing we haven't discussed as much is, you know, our languages, as Amethyst and Jeannette shared, how important it is to hear the languages of our ancestors and to hear the language of the earth and to embody it with embodied practices, you know, with our seeds and with our lands. And the word embed keeps coming up for me. How do we re-embed ourselves into the natural cycles, that we know where our water comes? We can go drink from our rivers. We know where our food comes from. We can harvest our food that we grew with our own seeds. I think the bioregional movement is key to this. You know, it's really kind of reinvention of the back to the land movement that happened in the 60s and 70s with well-meaning folks, but there was a lot of, you know, colonial assumptions still about who owns the land and whose land are you on. And I think today the whole land back movement and the land rematriation movement with how do we restore our lands and re-embed ourselves into our places by also giving recognition of the first peoples who hold those creation stories and hold those original instructions, and how to be guardians and caretakers and stewards of particular mountains and rivers. That respect has to happen. No one can just go into any place and start to do this without that respect for the first peoples. So I think that that is starting to happen, and that's a very exciting way that people are addressing this problem and this issue by re-embedding themselves into their landscapes with their foods and waters and energy, but always looking to the first peoples of that land as the original stewards of those places. So that's what I would like to offer here, and also offer the word regeneration. I think a lot of us, I'm in the field of sustainability, and we know that that word has been abused and misused and turned into something that is very meaningless in a way. So we're looking at terms like regeneration and restoration as kind of a new model of how we need to work within these complex systems in more harmonious ways. Miigwech.
Yeah, very good thought. You know, what's happening is that our other people that are part of this this conversation, our audience out there, they're just jumping up and down, you know, wanting to get into part of the conversation. I can feel them behind me and so on. I'll give Jeannette and Amethyst first chance to respond to any questions that might arise and so on. So I'm going to ask James to maybe come back on, and we'll deal with some of our listeners about any questions and so on they may have of our panel here, you know. So James.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Leroy, and everyone for this really wonderful conversation. It was, just beautiful, and so many important points have been raised. But yes, as Leroy says, we can open it up to everyone now. If you would like to ask a question, you can use the reactions bottom raise your hand function. Otherwise, if you makes you feel more comfortable, you can always write your question in the chat directly to me, and I can read it out for you. I can see it already. Oh, sorry. The only other thing I would like to mention is that as there are so many of you, and I want to cover as many questions as possible, if you could please keep your questions a bit more focused and more to the point, just to allow more questions to come in. So I can see that Tala has had her hand up for a while. So please.
Yes, thank you. This has been fantastic. I guess I have a question and really an answer, or more of an answer. For me, our role has been, why is our role not to just observe and learn and accumulate knowledge through no agenda, no political, not even any intention, just basic observation, which I think would lead to creative ways of thinking. So I guess my question is, rather than talk about our role in terms of rights and responsibilities, why is our role not just pure, at least for now, observation and learning? Wouldn't that bring us back into the chain, so to speak? I guess that's really my question. What about just basic observation, no agenda, no intention, just processing? And that would be our way of being, again, back to Melissa, I think you were saying how we can be reciprocal with nature. That would be our way of giving back, rather than doing anything, rather than fixing anything, just learning and observing. That's my question.
Amethyst, Jeannette?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. One of the things that I think that as human beings, and I don't know where it lies, you could say it lies within the value system of colonial societies or our societies, is that when we observe, one of the things that we don't do, and one of the things I like about the idea of truth and reconciliation, is telling truth. And we've gone from hundreds and hundreds, thousands, we don't tell truth. And because that truth is not talked about or exposed, then we are very, it gives us permission not to observe and not to really see. And so that is a problem that many of us at a personal level have to begin to tell our truths. And in order for ourselves to tell our truths, we then have to do a number of values, things like trust and honesty, which in a lot of ways are given to us in our tribal knowledges. But I think that one of the things that we have to be is truthful, even to say, this is what we're doing to the environment. And look at, I can see evidence of what it's doing, but how it also affects me. And a lot of times it's hard for us to be truthful to even ourselves, because we've been told, no, that isn't what you saw. You're not seeing what you think you're seeing. It's just, you know, your imagination. So I think that truth is very much a way of getting back in the chain, is being able to be truthful in your observations.
Mm-hmm.
Jeannette?
I guess one of the things that I was thinking about and I've been acting on is that observation requires knowledgeable observation, and I think that you know, paying attention, being out there, can bring you to some areas, but if you're seeing it through a lens that is part of the problem, then you know, moving outside of that is not going to happen, because that lens keeps focusing things in that same way. And so the courage to be able to move outside of that to other ways of seeing, other ways of knowing, other ways of embracing or enfolding or embedding yourself, I think is important in part of that learning or that education. And I'm not talking about schooling now. I'm talking about the self in terms of that reach for knowledge and that opening of those parts of your mind and those parts of your brain, I guess, that allow you to do that. And I know there's a lot of good work going on in relation to that. But from the Spelhue, from the Sealhue or Indigenous way, there are ways we can do that by, taking ourselves to the mountain to fast in a really particular guided way, and to be able to allow that knowledge to come through to us, and to be able to look at things like dreams, and to be able to understand where that's coming from in the whole that is us, that we are part of. And, that's sometimes mistaken for dogma or religion or things like that. So I think there's some areas there that really need to be rethought in how we can reconnect back or enfold ourselves back or embed ourselves back.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. James, next.
Tala. Next, we'll go to Lloyd.
Lloyd?
Thank you. Yes, it took me a minute to unmute myself. And I want to thank those who shared with us today so very much. And I've got a question, and I'm going to tell just a little bit of a story. 5 years ago, I met an Ojibwe water protector woman that has been doing river walks for about 15 years now. And about 8 years ago, she started having water ceremonies on the Mississippi here in the Twin Cities. I live in Minneapolis, every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. And she went to her elders to ask them to give her a ceremony that she could use with non-natives. So they gave her this. And 4 years ago, I got a chance to walk the Wisconsin River with her. And about the middle of the walk, I just had this profound understanding that this praying for the water, these water walks, represented the most profound respect and reverence for life that I have ever experienced. And I realized how much our Western culture, our dominant culture, has become a culture of death. And my question is, how do we get back on the path? And it relates to the question that Leroy asked before, but it's just putting life at the very center of it.
Mm-hmm. Anyone want to respond?
I might try one thought.
Harvey.
In simple terms, I think most people in the Western world know we're off course. And what we don't know is how to get back on course. So we do more of what we know how to do. And I think events like this help us to have a chance to open up and say, well, there is another course possible. Or we can build a different course. Or as Jeannette said, to paraphrase Jeanette's point, take another lens to the problem. But I think we first have to give ourselves permission to say, in the Western mind, we do have this subtext that, gee, look at all we've accomplished, we're already the greatest. And the problem is that in our seeds of greatness, if you will, have been the seeds of our destruction. And so we have to, as Greg said at the beginning, imagine a different future informed by the learnings of what's got us here now. And I think the only way we can do that is by talking about it openly. And you just said something profound, that your life was changed by realizing you could look at that river differently than you ever had before. Same river. And I think that's what we all have to do. And that it's also an exercise in humility, saying, I don't really know exactly, except I know that we need to think differently and that we need more respect for the natural world and for each other than we've shown. And there's lots of ideas in places like this. But we're groping towards a new collective future, or else we're falling off a cliff. So it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Anyone else want to speak to that before we move on to the next question?
Just a comment, Lloyd. All of our traditional ceremonies are, you could call them life-centered ceremonies, or life-centered. All things we're doing and talking about in terms of traditional, philosophies of Native peoples are, if you really try to look at them at their core, they're life-centered. They focus on enhancing, sustaining, maintaining, extending life in some shape or form, the community, the environment, the ecologies, and so I again bring up this notion of coming to knowledge, which then implies the issue of how we educate ourselves and how we educate our children in the context of some of the kinds of things that we're discussing in this dialogue. So I want to throw in the whole notion that we must change the educational system in ways that go beyond, I think, any of us have yet imagined. Again, I'm trying to do this in small ways, with working with different people who are very passionate about these questions, which expand education beyond just the schoolroom, but into the world and into the whole, because that's the way you begin to change consciousness, So Native people put a lot of emphasis on this process of coming to knowledge, okay? That's what that traditional education is about. It's about a process of coming to knowledge where these insights and these consciousness have the fertilization to actually manifest, to come into being. This is already happening, among many individuals. They're doing self-education in this sense, but this has to be expanded in a much more comprehensive way. And I think those are the things that begin to be very important at this point in time, as we move or try to move forward, because we're moving through this into this next world of being, as I said in this Pueblo emergence metaphor. And we have to begin to understand how we educate ourselves and how we come to know something in a more positive, more complete way, how we become more human. And that's the key to this.
Right. Thanks very much for that response. And the thing is, all of us are, I've always told people, all of us are about 65 to 70% water. So what you do to the water, you're doing to yourself, okay? So we have to remember that water is very, very important, okay? We're 65% water, so we better take good care of the water spirit. Next, James.
Thank you, Lloyd. Next, we'll go to Henry.
Henry.
I had to unmute myself here for a moment. So first of all, I really love this conversation today, being deeply aligned with deep ecology and ecopsychology. This really speaks to me today so much. And I just love hearing all these different voices by these wonderful educators. So thank you all. The question that comes up for me is, in answering the question, how do we become part of the chain again? I get squirrel news from England, and there's this huge movement happening called rewilding. And so these are my impressions. My impression is that we quite know, or many people quite know, especially very young people, Generation Z, for example, know a lot about what's wrong and that it needs to stop. Eco-grief is a huge developing mental health issue across the globe. So it doesn't seem to me like And I have a question here. It doesn't seem to me like that we don't know how to get back. It seems to me that we don't know how to stop the people that are keeping us from getting back. It seems to me that that is the issue, that since the 1960s, at least since Joanna Macy, we've been knowing, and we talk about making systemic change and educating people, but and these people have become educated. These young people have deeper awareness, but they're not able to stop the powers that are destroying the world. So how do we stop them, or how do we get them on board?
Mhm. Good question, loaded question. And Lee.
I think, and to go into this, we have to oversimplify so much because it's as Leroy said, it's a loaded question and it's a complicated question and it's a sincere question, clearly. Stopping the people that are causing and preventing that relinkage, that reconnection. In some way, it seems to me there are practical things that have to be done. That there are political activities, that there are ecological activities, any number of practical things that can and must be done to shift things in the world that derive from very powerful interests doing very destructive things. But the difficulty there is, it's what I think of as the other guy mentality, right? That somehow I'm holding the right view and the other guy has got the wrong view. And I've either got to stop the other guy or make the other guy think like me. So I do think in a way we have to stop the other guy. But when we buy too strongly into that way of thinking, we cease to reflect. To what degree are we still participating in all of that corruption? Corruption meaning things that are broken up and fragmented. So yes, I think in practical ways we need to act, but we have to be very careful that we don't allow that to take us to a place where we stop considering, am I still in some way a part of all of those difficulties? So I hope that might be helpful.
Anyone else want to speak to that? Jeannette.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, John, go ahead.
No,
I'd like to hear what.
I'll just say one sentence.
Okay, John.
Possibly believe in the butterfly effect. So that
right.
That your own small participation and prayer in the native sense will become amplified. It's not something you do, it's something you participate in. That's all.
Right. Yeah. Jeannette?
I was just thinking about reflecting on, that whole area of eco-psychology and the thinking that Theodore Roszak, for instance, talked about. And I once went to a think tank with him and a number of other, people that are working in that idea a number of years ago, and published an essay about my thinking on, that idea of the reflection of what level of, he used the word insanity, that we're all part of at this time, and in relation to where we should be at in our mental health or our emotional health. And one of the things that I shared there was a couple of words that my father, my grandmother would use. We were out berry picking, and I included that in the article. We were out berry picking, and my grandmother was speaking to me in the language, and she said, "I don't understand what makes them do what they're doing when there's everything here." And she said, and it's like something is missing, in one of the parts that make you whole is missing. And so filling that with all of these other things, and that's in one of our teaching stories about filling all of the, trying to fill that hole that is an endless need and endless consumerism, I guess. There's a name for it in our teaching stories in Ethnash Spelkun, that it consumes the human. We're not the consumers. We're actually consuming ourselves in that way, in that particular way, by what we're doing and how we do things. And it's an understanding how we do things to each other also, that is a part of that knowledge. How the butterfly effect is a good word, because how we do things individually and how other things respond to that are all like those effects moving around us continuously, locking us into that. And I think one of the stories of Anna Lee Walters, where she tells a story that really resonated for me in how that locking in happens, and you're not able to escape out of that, because you're locked in every which way that a human being can be locked in by other human beings. And so to change one thing in that web means that there are going to be other shifts, other changes. I think that's an important thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. James, how are we doing on time? Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, of course we can take one more question. Well, thank you, Henry, anyway, for coming in. Let's go to Larry.
Yeah. Okay. Larry.
You're muted, Larry.
You're on mute, Larry. Yeah.
Larry, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Hey, I'm on.
Okay.
All right. I'm really resonating with Leroy's metaphor of the broken chain. If the broken chain is evolving evolution, I believe that if we can learn how to dialogue our left brain with our right brain to get the balance that John Briggs was talking about. And by getting this balance, we have to really listen to both sides, because we keep using the word thinking. Thinking is a word that's used in science, and that's the other part of the issue. Everything is based on the reality of science, and that science has all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
Science
right.
is incomplete. We need the science is a right brain evolution activity. The left brain brings in the feeling function. So if we balance the thinking with the feeling, then we get true wisdom. And only when we get true wisdom can we be creative, totally co-creative with the creator. That's what our calling is really for. And so what we need is a new way to look at things, a new lens, a new worldview. And I call it mentoring, because mentoring is basically about listening to each other. And I have developed a process. It's called the Unitas paradigm. It unites this. It brings together the right side and the left side. And to put it in terms of the rainbow colors, the primary colors of red, yellow, and blue, if science is red, and if the if we call science the explicate order, and if we call the implicate order the soul, we balance the outer and the inner, then we get to true spirit. And the dimensions of that is unity, vision, wisdom, and creativity. And the bottom line has to be creativity, not the bottom line of science, which ends up typically domination, greed, and materialism.
Yeah.
That's it.
Wow. Thank you very much for those comments, Larry. It reminds me of a Gary Zukov in his book, Dancing Woolly Masters,
Yes,
where
yes.
he talks about, hey, at one time, the church was that's who we went to get the answers. And pretty soon we found out we're not getting all the answers from the church. And so as of late, it's science. And so if we're in a conversation and I ask you, where did you hear that? How do you know it's true? And if somebody says, oh, science says that, hey, then it means, hey, we have to believe it because science said it. Say. And I think we have to do our own research and not just believe. Because, as Zukov said, after 300-400 years of reliance on science, the scientists are coming back and they're saying, we don't know what the answer is. We think the answer is in you. So that's what we have to do, is really examine us. And in this case, we, the homo sapiens, we, the human beings. Yeah. Let me take this opportunity to end. It's such a wonderful conversation, and I'd love to keep going, but to respect the clock that we live by, and firstly, I would like to recognize, you might have seen a little bit of artwork over here on the side in an earlier screen. It was to remind us that we were kind of, honoring one of our family who had really good, deep thoughts, and that was Rose von Thader, and unfortunately left this world a few months ago. So we wanted to remember her, otherwise she would have been with us today. But the message that I've been trying to give audiences that I've had the opportunity to speak to has been, when you stop and think about it, the fish has been around for 450 million years. The fish has been around 450 million years. Yeah. And other animals, like Amethyst was talking about in her talk that she brought out so beautifully about the buffalo. And, bovine animals like the buffalo have been around something like 15 million years. Okay, think about that. Then we come to the hominoids, us, human beings. And as we see ourselves, hey, maybe we've been around only 200,000 years. We've only been around 200,000 years. Therefore, that fish has 450 million years of memory that it can draw on. They can go back that far. The buffalo, for instance, as a bovine animal, probably has 15 million years of life experience. And we, the Homo sapiens, 200,000 years. And we think we know it all. We're brand new kids on the block. Okay. So we should learn, as has been suggested, from our brother and sister, the fish, those bovine animals that have been around for a long time. The three sisters have been around for a long time. Okay. We should learn from them. We're brand new kids on the block. So next time we talk, maybe we'll have some stories to tell about lessons that we've learned from those other beings that have been around for a long time. So I want to thank you all for your participation in this wonderful conversation. And I'd like to thank our audience out there. I wish we could have included you there in this conversation had it been an in-person dialogue along David Bohm's thinking. So thank you very much. James?
Thank you so much, everyone, for this wonderful conversation. Thank you, Amethyst, John, Melissa, Greg, Jeannette, and Harvey for participating in this roundtable. Thank you so much, Leroy, for facilitating this this dialogue. And of course, thank you so much to Lee for not only participating and being part of the organizational part of this dialogue, but also for the whole series. These past 3 weeks that we've all spent together. Well, actually, Lee, do you want to say anything just to conclude this first part of Beyond Bohm?
Well, just briefly, again, to thank everyone, Amethyst, John, Jeannette, Harvey, Melissa, Greg, and Leroy for never letting up on this all these years, to continue these dialogues, which are really just of immense value. Imagine 7 butterflies, 8 butterflies here, and then 130 or 40 butterflies that are in the larger group. And now all of that energy is moving. As Jeannette said, it's all moving now. So I really just want to express the thanks to Leroy again for keeping this all moving, and to Amethyst for keeping Leroy moving. So
she does a good job.
Very good.
And to PARI, my goodness, the marvelous work that's being done through PARI in so many different ways. It's so special, and all of us are really grateful to everything that everybody at PARI, especially James and Eleanor, do. And James will tell you there's another segment coming up of Beyond Bohm, and he'll explain that a bit. But for everything that we've done so far, thank you everyone for participating. It's been marvelous. Okay, James, back to you.
Thank you so much, Lee. It's been really an honor just to host this dialogue and to be part of this series as a whole, as that you've organized, Lee. And of course, thank you to all the participants to join us today and throughout these 3 weeks. Thank you for those participating with your questions, with your comments in the chat, or just by sitting there and listening. I too would like to echo Lee in thanking Eleanor, my mom, who has been behind the scenes working hard, trying to get everyone here, basically. So thank you, Mama. Before we go, I just like to invite you all to this second part of Beyond Bohm, which has been curated by Paavo Pilkkanen. During these 3 weeks, 3 weekends that will run between the 6th and 28th of August, we will be joined by scholars such as Basil Hiley, Marja-Liisa Kakuri-Knutila, Petteri Limnell, Paavo Pilkkanen, William Seeger, and Margie van Strien. In this part, we will talk about more the analytical philosophy of David Bohm, topics such as physics and perception, the notions of truth and understanding, the view of science as perception, communication, and study of knowledge understood as process. There is much more information on our website, so I do hope to see you there in about 2 weeks' time. In the meantime, you can always contact us on our website or email eleanor@pariscenter.com to contact Eleanor. Thank you all again. It's been quite an amazing 3 weeks. We'll see you again soon here at the Paris Center.